Okay, so we're talking a little bit about corruption, and whether or not it's 40%. I guess we'll have to dig around to ensure it. It's hard to say.
Yeah.
It's the stats I read. Regardless, there's corruption that definitely exists in the arms trade. Now, whether it be between state to state, and it sounds like there is some parameters in place that prohibit corruption. I mean, let's be honest. So commerce is commerce. There's going to be corruption regardless of who's involved. The illicit trade continues at such an alarming rate. Why have we not seen more from the international community to stop these illegal weapons traders?
Well, I would say that the illicit arms trade mostly composes of the sale either by dummy companies, which may represent legitimate arms manufacturers, or which are themselves simply smugglers of arms, to non-state actors. That would be, in my opinion, the biggest chunk of the corruption that goes on. Now, there is other corruption that goes on, and every now and then you'll hear about a government, such as the government of the UK about 10 years ago, going after BAE, which used to be called British Aerospace. I can't remember what it was.
Weapons
but it is one of the largest weapons manufacturers in the world. The government of the United States went after Boeing several years back, and so on. So there's always some attempt, some oversight on the part of governments to try to control the corruption within the arms trade, just as they do try to control corruption in other trades. I mean, we and the Americans both, for example, have laws which make it illegal for Canadians to bribe nationals of other countries in making trade deals, whatever it is they're selling to them, whether it be wheat or aircraft.
That's right, yeah.
So there is that effort, at least on the part of Western democratic countries, to try to crack down on black market activities on the part of major corporations. And I think they largely do, but there's always somebody who wants to make a buck. There's always somebody who's got an opportunity to do so. And when you've got the non-state actors out there, many of whom will pay whatever it's worth to get a hold of rocket-propelled grenades or anti-tank missiles or whatever the case is, that's the temptation to feed that market is huge.
Can I just jump in
Please.
here? Because I think there's also an interesting dynamic that goes along with this, and it's an ironic dynamic that, to the extent that we are successful in making states more accountable, there is the incentive in the industry and elsewhere to actually bypass the state and use non-state or criminal groups to try and get deals made and so on. And also you see this dynamic in how states exercise force. So for example, if you're a soldier in an average military, in an average army, you know that you're bound by the humanitarian law, human rights law, and so on and so forth. So what we see in many wars, many civil wars, for example, is that you have exactly this private military contractors or paramilitary groups that are not that have a very fuzzy line of command with the central authority. So why does that happen? It happens because governments know that their own soldiers are very strictly bound to the law. So that's a good thing, right? There's no question that that's a good thing, but it's also important to understand that there is an unintended consequence. It's what economists call a moral hazard, essentially.
I would hope so. It's a huge moral hazard. I mean, we've got the rules of war that are circumvented so quickly and so easily. I think these are some of the loopholes that probably really concern a lot of citizens around the world. It doesn't seem like there's a whole lot, especially in the way of private contractors, being done to curb that, or am I off the mark on that?
No, you're not off the mark. It's a huge problem. It's only arisen to a really significant level, I'd say, within the last 20, 25 years. I mean, there's always been mercenaries. You can read about them in the Bible, if you will, so it goes back thousands of years. But the actual building of large multinational corporations which essentially rent or lease mercenaries and the equipment that goes with them, and in which they work in quasi-governmental ways to act, for example, as the arm of the government of this state or the government of that state, that's become a very serious issue. over the last 20 or 30 years. And as you said, and as Pablo just said, it's been increasingly the case in the Western, excuse me, democratic industrialized countries that soldiers are, that the governments attempt to hold their soldiers accountable to the rules of war, whatever they are in any particular instance. And we had one instance in Afghanistan where a Canadian officer was court-martialed for shooting a wounded Taliban, killing a wounded Taliban fighter. That doesn't go on in some of these other private companies. So all kinds of crimes can be committed, all kinds of war crimes can be committed. And then, well, you say, well, who's responsible? What address do you knock on? What door do you knock on to try to take these people to the International Court of Justice for committing war crimes?
It's a great point. It's a great point. Closer to home, I mean, Canada is constantly sold around the world as a global champion of human rights. Yet recently, we sold Saudi Arabia, a noted human rights violator among watchdog groups, $15 billion worth of fighting machines, fighting vehicles. Is this hypocrisy? If it is, has it affected our image around the globe? Pablo, what do you think?
I think David's
okay,
probably
we'll
better
okay,
suited to answer this question.
Well, I personally, I'm torn and I'm troubled by that kind of a situation, because on the one hand, I know that a large number of Canadian jobs depend on the arms industry.
Certainly.
The arms industry creates high-tech and high-paying jobs. It's not cutting wood and sending it off to Asia. So there's that. When you're selling to a country like Saudi Arabia, which is definitely one of the world's most significant violators of individual human rights, you're making a moral judgment that this stuff that you're selling to them will not be used by them to oppress their own people. Now, we have sold stuff to Saudi Arabia before which was not used to oppress their own people.
Yeah.
But to oppress their own people. But does that mean that will continue? And if you don't sell, that's the old story. If you don't sell it to them, will the British or the Americans or the French or the Dutch or the Swedes, you know, the morality in the arms trade, there is morality in the arms trade, but it's a very, I think, a very different kind of morality, because these are not vacuum cleaners, right? These are RPGs and machine guns and armored vehicles and so on and so forth, and they're capable of doing a lot of harm. So I think a country like Canada has to say to itself, well, do we hold ourselves back from selling arms to certain kinds of countries? There's certain countries we certainly wouldn't sell arms to. Is Saudi Arabia one of them? If the Saudi regime goes down, who takes its place? And one of the points that I've made in other fora is it's not going to be a Jeffersonian democracy. So it's a very difficult question for us, and I think we have to balance our own national interests against the possible commission of or allowing others to commit crimes with the materials that we supply them.
War for profit. Is this a reality in today's world?
Well, if you look at the appearance and the actions of certain groups like private military contractors, I think there's no question that some of those groups are engaged in, are driven by profit. We are also seeing the privatization of a lot of functions that used to be conducted purely by the state, not only with regard to previously state-held public services that have been privatized, outside of war, but also in wartime as well. There's a lot more private contractors that are even behind the front lines, providing all sorts of services. And I think one of the arguments that the film that we discussed at the festival last week was trying to make was that profiteering and the kind of corruption at the very high levels that you see in the formal structures of the arms trade is a really important part of this. And I think there's some arguments to be made in that sense.
Some compelling evidence exists. Yeah.
I don't think countries go to war for profit. Some countries may earn profits.
Oh, certainly.
The United States came out of the First World War as a very well-endowed country, not just by selling arms to, but they didn't actually sell arms to all sides, but they sold arms. Their own country wasn't despoiled by war. Almost everybody ended up owing the United States all kinds of money after the First World War.
Well, and certainly the Second World War didn't hurt their cause.
Well,
either.
in the Second World War, exactly, the Second War was the same. But generally speaking, the causes of wars are mixes of sort of toxic mixes of pride, interests, fear, jealousies, projecting ahead the possibility that these guys will do this to you if you don't do that to them, and so on and so forth. It's as old as history. The Peloponnesian Wars, which were the wars between ancient Sparta and ancient Athens, were wars that started really on the basis of fear more than anything else, the fear of the possibility of what the other guy was going to do to you if you didn't do something to him
hence
first.
the nuclear arms race, the Cold War. I mean, we just don't learn as a species, it would
Well,
seem.
no, we don't. In matters of war, we don't learn.
Yeah, but apropos of this, the point about fear, I mean, this gets back to what I was suggesting earlier, that I think we also have to be careful. So if it's the case, which is an argument that the film was trying to make last week, that the arms industry has an interest in fomenting that kind of fear, to say, look, there's some bad people out there, you need our weapons to protect yourselves against these bad people. And there's a profit motive right there. But there's also a way in which critics of war can exaggerate the extent to which war itself is a threat, and propagate these fears that are really not based in evidence. So I think it's important for everyone to really base the discussions and analyses and suggestions about what to do on clear evidence, as opposed to fear mongering, because fear is absolutely a key part of this whole thing.
Look beyond the headlines, probably the bottom line. Gentlemen, that's all the time we have. Probably could have sat here for another 30 minutes. I want to thank you both for coming in. Good to meet you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank
Pablo.
you. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Folks, that's all the time we have for this evening. As per usual, you can get at us. We're on social media, be it Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Don't be a stranger. Till next time, take care.